Welcome to the Lifeboat Hour with your host, Carolyn Baker.
Everybody knows that the dice are loaded. Everybody rolls with their fingers crossed. Everybody knows the war is over. Everybody knows the good guys lost.
Welcome to the new Lifeboat Hour, and thanks for joining or rejoining us again today. We have a very special Lifeboat Hour to share with you today, which you probably heard us mention on this podcast, the particular lifeboat that we're going to share today. And certainly we've been mentioning it on Facebook if you go there regularly. Today I've invited my friends Dean Walker and Ivey Cone to join me in sharing very clearly and specifically with all of you the enormously exciting aspects of the online symposium we're going to be bringing you October 13th. Many of you know Dean Walker from his video podcast, The Impossible Conversation, and maybe you've heard Dean on the new Lifeboat Hour discussing his forthcoming book by the same title. Dean has decades of experience in video production and personal and organizational development training. Ivey Cone is the producer of Fuki Cafe, which you may have viewed online, and she was a key player in the no longer extinct Extinction Radio podcast. She's a seasoned radio and video producer whose expertise Dean and I consider invaluable. So today, Dean, Ivey, and I are going to be talking about the upcoming symposium, and we want you to listen up and really hear what we're creating for you, which is a unique opportunity to connect online in a safe and reliable space to talk about things you probably can't talk about much in your own world. Now, the title of this symposium is Active Love Beyond the 11th Hour, and it begins Thursday, October 13th, and ends Thursday, November 10th. To get all of the information about the symposium and register for it, please go to my website, carolynbaker.net. So I'd like you, Dean and Ivey, to talk about why we've created this amazing event. Who wants to begin?
Oh gosh, well, I'll jump right in and say that one of the reasons for me is that everything is happening faster than expected across the board. And more than ever, we need to help each other understand what we're up against and gather together and have that comfort of gathering in circle. That's a principal one for me. It's just all happening so fast.
Yeah, Dean, what do you think?
Yep, that's exactly why we're doing it as far as I know. Well, in terms of what got us three first talking, yep, all of that. What we soon discovered, though, is that there's a calling. I think these are new words for me to use about our getting together and our producing of this symposium. And for me, it does show up as a calling. And the calling is different. It's different than the many books and endless numbers of podcasts you've done, Carolyn, and all your work, Ivey, in terms of video production, audio production for so many different providers, content producers themselves, like what you've done to bring out Guy McPherson's work or any number of other folks who are really well known in this community. Something different started calling. And I think something different, as far as I'm concerned, is the consistent calling for community. That we really need each other. If I can call on the title of Bill Kauth and Zoe Alawan's book and website, we need each other. And they do specific work about building community in any given region or area that you happen to live in. And what I'm seeing is that whether you get to build community in your particular neighborhood, if you're lucky enough to be able to do that, fantastic. But there's so many of us that are isolated. We're far apart. And we can look forward to every once in a while a new book from someone we really respect or look forward to hearing from. Or like this symposium where we could actually be with other people. It's online, but my gosh, the amount of connection that we've had in this kind of event in the past is amazing. And what I kept hearing when we first got together to produce this symposium from the three of us was, this is what people need ongoingly.
Right. And, as most of you know, this is our second symposium this year. Now, why did we choose to do a second symposium this year? I mean, we could have waited till next year. But as we look at the events that are going on, is climate catastrophe and violence and upheaval and the craziness of the U.S. political election and whatever that's going to bring forth, just all of this we're looking at and we're going, you know what? It's time to do another symposium before we wait another year. And we're going to have some of the same people, but like Derek Jensen's going to be back, Becca Martinson's going to be back, but we're going to have mostly new faces, new voices, and this is not going to be like a big teaching thing, like we're going to stand up here and give you all this information. Rather, it's going to be, as it was the last time, our speakers really sitting down with us and being honest and coming from their heart and talking about their concerns. And then we all have the opportunity to respond to them in a Q&A and talk with each other. And the amount of connection that this makes available, it was just jaw-dropping last time, and we're hoping for that again. So, I'm sorry, Ivy, go ahead.
Well, the deep comfort and commiseration factor that was so present in the last symposium. I feel that the guests we have taken that to a much deeper cut of reality. Yeah, they have. And again, just to remind folks, the way you register, the way you find out more is to go to my website at carolynbaker.net. And it's very important that you know that if you've registered for the symposium, you don't have to attend every session live. We do understand the busyness and the demands of life that we all face. So we want everyone to know that once you're registered for the symposium, following each live session, you'll receive a link to a recording of that session that you can view and review on your own. Now, the cost for the symposium is still $75. And if you register before September 30th, it's good to go for $75. And after that, the price increases to $95. Now, when you break this down and divide the maximum cost of $95 by 9 sessions, the cost is basically $10 per session. And we know for sure that you can't put a price on what you're going to get in this symposium in terms of experiencing community and gaining hard-won insight, support, and tools for the journey that we're all on. Dean and Ivy, do you want to say anything about that?
About the symposium itself?
About the symposium, the cost, the value, anything else you'd like to add?
Well, Carolyn, I can't help but keep going back to that same place I just mentioned before, which is that sense of continuity is showing up for me. And I'm in a number of different groups with different but similar or parallel direction in terms of trying to make a difference in our community in some small way and so on. And what I keep seeing is that what we desperately need, we have almost no training in whatsoever. And that being how to be with one another, how to be in community, how to, even people who have grown up in the same household, a family, blood family, there's no training for how to be with each other in an empowering and good way, especially when we're prone to be in an environment up to our earlobes in chronic stress, which many people complain about now, much less what's coming in the very near future. And so if I look at it like the cost of $10 per session to speak with people and to hear the kind of quality of life that these thought leaders have created in the face of what I have come to call the sober data, the stuff that we've all known about for quite some time, is extraordinary. Like, I don't know where else one could spend $10 and come up with this kind of important sharing. Deep sharing that can, actually, if I let it in, can empower me to have more capacity in the face of stressors. It's an exciting time, and it's one that I I have a hard time imagining finding a better way to spend my $10 than to sit down for an evening and be a part of the symposium, and then to have recordings of it later. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, really.
Mm-hmm. Well, the financial and time constraints that we're all under are only going to increase. And this really, for me, it urges me to be more discerning about how I choose to use my time and the available financial resources, because I'm valuing my mental and emotional well-being more highly day by day, because if I don't take care of myself in a really good way, in a deep way, I cannot be in service to those around me. And I've spent a lot of time, as both of you have and many of our listeners have, in processing where we are and what is so glaringly in our face and how really uncomfortable it's going to get. And so, having this symposium and having those recordings, to be able to go back, and not only for the participants to review those later, but for them to be able to share that with their families, with a friend, to take that and use it and get huge amount of mileage out of that material over time. So when you look at it through that lens, the cost really becomes really negligible. Now, for some people, $95 means, do they eat? Do they feed their family? I get it. But over the long haul, the material that this symposium is going to provide is going to be like meat and potatoes for their spirit.
Yeah. I'd like to just say a little bit, while I'm thinking about it, about each of our speakers. And if I forget anybody, please help me with that. And also feel free to add your own comments about each one. We're going to have Derek Jensen returning. And of course, many of you know him from his fabulous books and from Deep Green Resistance and his work that's just all over the place. And we're really looking forward to having him back. Also, we're going to have Becca Martinson back, but this time with her husband, Chris. And many of you are familiar with his website, Peak Prosperity. Chris has been around for a really long time talking about economic collapse and how we can take care of ourselves financially. We're going to have a good friend of mine, Michael Brownlee, who's actually a close friend and neighbor of mine, who's written a wonderful new book on food security in the face of climate change. Michael's got some amazing things to say about food security and how we can take care of ourselves around food. We're going to have Jiwa Woodbury, who has a wonderful website called Planetary Hospice. He's been on Extinction Radio and on my podcast talking about climate change. And one of the most fascinating things that I've heard Jiwa talk about recently is trauma, and how trauma has influenced us in the direction of almost not being able to talk about climate change as a culture. And what are some of the other folks? You guys help me with this.
Well, I was just thinking about Michael Dowd. I was introduced to Michael Dowd a couple of years ago when he did his own symposium that was extraordinary.
Right.
I think it's still available if you look it up on YouTube. And while I have not at all been a religious person in my life, in fact, if anything, I've been really antagonistic to all matters religious. But I've found, as I've been writing this my first book that you mentioned, the Impossible Conversation, I kept finding that I was drifting further and further away from the data and the information and the projections and the science of it, which there's plenty, now less, but there's still plenty in the book. And I kept heading toward things that were far more philosophical, far more spiritual, and even in some cases religious. And I kept finding myself being fascinated by people who are deeply involved in religious expression of some kind or another, like Michael Dowd, like Catherine Hayhoe is another well-known person that way. Excuse me, that they are perfect exemplars of what I keep calling the impossible conversation. And, punchline for the book is that the impossible conversation is what we all need to be doing and having with ourselves especially with other people, and then in a less obvious way with Earth herself.
Right.
And Michael Dowd has an extraordinary take on how to embody a person of religious faith in this day and age. And I won't, blow his cover.
Right.
But, there's no cover. I'm being silly. But I want you to hear it freshly from him in the symposium, his orientation to how to be in the world and be connected with the robust beauty that many feel in their religious practices. But he's done that in such a way as to shift their primary attention to the earth and the moment being the Bible, so to speak, being their testament, rather than the book. It's deeply inspiring, and I'd say it's on par with the Pope doing the encyclical.
Right.
Here I am, an absolutely anti-Catholic person my whole life, and I found myself just melting in the face of these two people creating these extraordinary documents. So there's just another one of our guests is Michael Dowd. And
Sean Kelly, to take it off the planet and into the cosmos.
Right.
Sean Kelly is, it's the California Institute for Integral Studies, is it not, Carolyn?
Yes, it is. CIIS.
Yes. And he brings a distinctly largest perspective possible to us with really some seriously heartfelt, almost anguish at what is happening on the planet. He's written a paper, if I remember correctly, Planetary Madness, Cosmic Wisdom?
Planetary Madness, Cosmological Wisdom, I believe it is.
Yes, and so he's just delightful, and we're so pleased that he's able to join this conversation with us in the upcoming Act of Love Beyond the 11th Hour. And we do have a couple other guests, but I think you, Carolyn, may be able to fill our listeners in.
Yeah. Lisa Van Susteren, I'm very excited about her. She's a psychiatrist who's written this fabulous paper on the mental health effects of global warming and how, at least in the United States, medical care is, healthcare system is totally unprepared for the mental health effects as well as the physical ramifications of climate change. And then we have finishing up this wonderful series is Deb Sarco. And some of you have seen Deb's work on Facebook, I'm sure. Deb is Canadian. She's an author. She's a naturalist, a social critic, a poet. She's at debosarco.com. You can read about her there. All of these guests are just fascinating people who totally get it about catastrophic climate change, who totally get it about our entire planetary predicament. So we could not be more fortunate than to have these minds and hearts with us, people who are going to open up about the heartbreak they face in dealing with all of this, as well as the resources and the tools that they're using to deal with our situation. Well, today we're talking not only about why we've created this symposium, the second one in 2016, but why going forward, this symposium is kind of like a launching pad for an ongoing sense of community support and practical tools that we can all employ in navigating the increasing severity of the predicament in which we find ourselves in 2016. But our focus today in this podcast is not going to be on the predicament, nor really in the symposium either. But what we need to do, rather, to support ourselves and to support each other as this crisis deepens. So why don't we all together name some of the core pieces of the symposium that are really, really important to us? For me, it's just the amazing memory that I have of the last symposium and the constant feedback that I'm getting from people who are in that symposium who were already clients of mine or they've since become life coaching clients of mine, who found it so incredibly valuable to have that level of connection.
Yeah.
There's very definitely, no matter how well versed one is, and even if you have a few people in your immediate physical world, there is this sense of being so alone or in a small group who get it. And again, having that sense of being seen, being heard, being acknowledged for your pain, for your challenge. I, I think that is really, really, for me, the commiseration factor is really one of the biggest ones. Because when I walk away from my computer and I'm not sitting in circle with this amazing group of people, I will have that in my heart. I will know that they are there. I will know that wherever they are, wherever I am, there is that connection between us, which nourishes me and comforts me. So for me, that's a really key piece to this whole project.
Yeah. I don't think I could say it any better than you two did just now, in terms of that kind of camaraderie, that kind of community or tribe, that kind of safe container to be able to return to is absolutely essential. And excuse me, I was lucky enough to get some pretty strong feedback about the rough draft of my book, The Impossible Conversation, from Carolyn and from Andrew Harvey recently. And by their suggestion, I am committed to reducing this tome, from 300 pages full of all kinds of references and data and so on. Impressive, I'm sure, but it just obviously was way too much. And so I'm reducing it to half its size, and I'm also transforming the voice of it. And I'm sharing what I believe will be present in the symposium, and that is there's a shift in my commitment from the data and the doom and gloomness of it that can come, as no matter how we try and put lipstick on the pig of the data. I'm shifting it to what I call a state of grace. I certainly didn't invent those words, because every major religious tradition and spiritual tradition has some version of it. But it's a distinct experience that I've had punctuated throughout my life. And I'm very, very clear that that's probably one of the biggest blessings I've had, is those experiences of grace. And that the grace can be called an expansion, a feeling of expansiveness. And I think both you, Ivy, and Carolyn just now were talking about that in terms of what we feel when we feel really connected with other people. We feel an expansion and an inclusion with people. We feel our hearts melting open instead of having to hold a guardedness around those hearts, as we do in our day. And what I'm seeing, again, in the formulation of the book is that it is not safe in the world to be having this conversation. I think it's absolutely imperative. Certainly I'll speak for myself. It's imperative for me to have that safe container that you both described. And I need to also build out resilience and capacity in myself, skills of resilience. And there are actually skill sets that can be learned. And that's something that Carolyn mentioned briefly at the very beginning, which is there's actually an implied continuity well beyond the symposium. We're planting seeds in the symposium that we intend to fully grow, very selfishly for ourselves first, so we can have an expanding circle of people around the world who share these kinds of skill sets, who have more and more room in their heart, and more experience of a larger community that they can then rely on as things get tougher. Because I can't help but imagine that we're going to see more and more chronic tsunamis of stress coming around the world. Lisa Van Susteren, for those people who are listening to this and haven't heard of her before, please look her up on the, perhaps we can include a link to that particular article or report that she was an author of, Carolyn, on your website. Extraordinary report, and anticipating 200 plus million Americans anticipated to have experiencing chronic stress and the debilitating effects of that in the face of what's happening now and soon to come more. And so I'm looking forward to this symposium being the planting of the seeds of little nodes of community, little tribes, and both real face-to-face tribes when you're lucky enough to have that, and also to spread the technology of how to do this online when that's the best you got. Because again, very selfishly, this is what I know I need to feel safe, to feel held, and to be able to offer that from my heart to others as well.
That's beautifully put, Dean. You mentioned resiliency, and one of the things that I see as being a key piece of the offering of this symposium is that we get to hear live and upfront and personal what people are doing in their daily practice to maintain their emotional equilibrium, to stay grounded. And so I know that the three of us have daily practices. I'm looking to improve mine, to strengthen it. I've recently discovered that, my management tools have not been as robust as I would have liked them to be. And so I'm really needing to look at how do I increase that resiliency factor. So the symposium will offer our participants an opportunity to hear what other people are doing and be able to adopt some of those into their own daily practices so that they can strengthen and build that resilient daily, sometimes hourly, self-management for stress.
Well, each time we do a symposium, and I say each time, we've only done one, but, when you do an event like the last symposium, you learn things from it, hopefully, and you use that learning then to create in the future. So one thing we learned from the last symposium is how important it is to have follow-up and to have something that's kind of the next thing after the symposium, because you have this wonderful experience of connection and then you just go off and be alone again. So for this very reason, we're planning to follow up this symposium with an optional every other week free online call in which people who've attended the symposium or people who haven't but are tuned into what the symposium is about can join us every other week and share. And this will be like on the program that we're using is Zoom, which is like Skype, only we think it's better and it's free. This will be a regular online meeting circle that, as we said, is optional, but you can count on it being there for you, and you can bring whatever feelings are going on for you to the circle. And I really want to emphasize that this is not a teaching session. It's a heart-based circle where you have a place to express whatever's on your heart, whether you're sad or frustrated or scared or brimming with joy and inspiration. So that's part of what we learned that we need to do, and we're excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'd just like to reemphasize that even if you don't join this conversation on any kind of a regular basis, just knowing that it is available and that you can, at any given week, have a safe place to go to share, to gain comfort, or to be that heart with ears, because people more and more need to be heard. And so, whether you're the one sharing or whether you're the one listening, it's a valuable place. And again, it's an optional and it's free, and it's a place where we can support each other.
Another way of describing this, I really enjoy, Francis Weller's words, having just experienced another of his grief rituals, is, each of those every other week meetings could be called a temporary village, right, coming together just for the amount of time that we do. And that might mean that some number of people connect up in between, because there's that affinity, there's that desire, and so on. And it might mean that that's just about the only time that someone gets to connect with other people in this way.
Right.
There's any number of different directions that people can come from to this work. I couldn't be more excited to be offering this ongoing seedling of temporary, or I don't know what a better word would be at the moment, but a temporary village from time to time. And to know that little by little we're building out our relationships, and we're allowing ourselves to kind of figuratively fall back in each other's arms a little bit, feel held, feel listened to, feel heard, as Ivy was just saying. So simple, but basically non-existent in most of our culture.
Right.
So really, you know, I see this as being a building a safety net. You know, our predicament is not going to go away. And so we will need to continue to process and deepen our skill set for how to be, how to self-manage, how to be there for other people. And, you know, I love that, you know, temporary village, you know, intermittent village,
Right.
Village on demand.
Yeah, exactly. VOD.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, we're not only going to be offering this online call, every other week after the symposium, but we've got some other things up our sleeves for future symposiums at the first of the year, and other online teaching and connecting opportunities for people in the future going forward, because we're just finding that as the intensity of the crisis deepens, that we need to deepen our presence with each other and our resilience, that we need to hone those skills and those practices that are going to carry us through as we navigate this predicament. So the symposium again is Active Love Beyond the 11th Hour. Dean and Ivy, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I do, actually. I just want to offer something that I've kind of stumbled into, and I'm a little embarrassed to say that it's taken me this long to stumble this hard exactly where I should have been a year ago if I'd had my wits about me. And that I've just stumbled more and more into, Carolyn, into the strength of your books. Mostly how that's been happening is, in addition to the couple that I have read, you've been including from time to time little excerpts from the book in the DND, your daily news digest, where if people go to your website and they can sign up to receive your daily news digest about the current affairs of the world, but from a sober and sobering perspective. And I don't know if people realize how often you're now including a lot of inspiration, including pieces from your own work. And it's made a huge difference for me. I think you are an extraordinary writer, and you also find a way to include equally inspiring, other authors, poets, quotes from those folks that really just make an extraordinary difference in my inner toolkit. So I just wanted to mention that to people who might not have dived in yet to Carolyn's work. I would recommend it highly. And if I could suggest, just from my experience recently, I'd highly recommend Carolyn's most recent book, Dark Gold, the book about the shadow at the individual level all the way out to the global level. And, I've just experienced, I'm fairly familiar with shadow work and so on, but I've got to say that just in the past few days, I've had my eyes widened. I feel far more awake, and almost painfully so right now, to how much shadow and unresolved, unintegrated shadow, unconscious shadow is running so much of life, including in my own life. It's very hard to look at that way, but I really get a sense that this is just previews of coming attractions. And these are coming, and they're coming hard. And I would recommend highly, if you want to build out your toolkit of knowledge about facility with shadow, please pick up that book. And one other resource that I would recommend for anyone, whether you participate with us in the ongoing group or in the symposium or in any way, one book that I equally would recommend is called Don't Even Think About It. from a man named George Marshall. The subtitle of the book is Why Our Brains Are Wired to Ignore Climate Change. So this sounds actually kind of dry as I'm mentioning this title. I've got to say that he's done an extraordinary job of going into the brain science and going into the social dynamics of why, as human beings, are we allowing denial to be at the level that it is? Why don't we talk about the things that are so damn important? He's extraordinary. Very knowledgeable man, has transformed the writing of the book that I was just telling you about, my own book. And he's also helped me he has to have saved me at least 2 years of solid research to get this kind of facility of just an understanding how do human beings operate and why are we being so foolish in the face of all this? It's crazy making. So between Carolyn's book on the shadow and George Marshall's Don't Even Think About It, I would just highly recommend those as references. And if you could bring either of those having been read to the symposium, you're going to launch out of that symposium.
Well, I would just like to add a closing comment that it has been a delight to work with both of you in creating the symposium. And it has been a journey in and of itself. And it has broadened and deepened my beingness. And I found myself in the last year just sort of drowning in data, and have made very deliberate and active choices to shut my brain off and to sit out in nature, to just I am fortunate enough that I have, beautiful, living, growing things, and a few birds still left in my neighborhood. Not as many as there used to be, but there's still a few, and a couple of squirrels. And, in the spring, the mama squirrel, when we were just starting the symposium, decided to chew up and shred one of my Tibetan prayer flags to create her nest for her babies.
That's a good use of a prayer flag.
That's an excellent use of a prayer flag. And so, just being quiet and listening to the plants, listening to the critters, listening has become for me a deeply comforting and nourishing practice. And that is my closing tidbit.
Well, thank you for that, Ivy. And Dean, thank you for mentioning the Daily News Digest. Next year, it will be 10 years that I have been putting out the Daily News Digest, something I learned from Mike Rupert way back in the day. And it's a complete gathering of economic, environmental, geopolitical, civil liberties, and cultural news every day. That some of it you're going to find in mainstream news and some of it you won't. And who's going to sit down for you and comb through all of that and put all of that together, bundle it, and send it out to you 7 days a week, unless I'm traveling? The answer is nobody. And so that's what I do. And then in recent months, I felt very passionate about, I really need to put at the end of the news, a section of inspiration. It could be articles from other people. It could be excerpts from my book or my previous articles. But you're not going to find a news digest anywhere in the world, probably, that gives you all of this mostly bad news, followed by tremendous inspiration that helps you hold what you've just read. Mm-hmm. So go to my website and click on the subscription tab, and you can learn more about getting the Daily News Digest. Well, Dean Walker and Ivey Cone, thank you so much for joining me today on the new Lifeboat Hour. And listeners, thank you for joining us. We really, really want you to join us in the symposium because we'd love to hear from you and receive whatever you want to share with us that's coming up for you these days as we deal with the repercussions of our planetary predicament. So to get more information about the symposium and register, go to my website, carolynbaker.net. And until next time, stay safe, stay well, and stay awake.
Thank you for joining us today. You can hear all podcasts and learn about Carolyn Baker's other works at www.carolynbaker.net. Her daily news digest is available by subscription and is delivered to your inbox 7 days per week with real news on economics, environment, geopolitics, civil liberties, and cultural issues, plus links to articles on inspiration and resilience. Come sail with us again next week on the Lifeboat Hour.